listener production.
Hello, I'm Sasha Barbagat. Welcome to The Briefing. Big changes are likely coming to the way we consume news. Meta has announced it will not be renewing a deal that sees the social media company pay Australian news outlets for their content on Facebook and Instagram. What does that mean for you and I? Well, it could mean our feeds will no longer include posts from news sites.
If Meta is to remove news and political content from Instagram and Facebook, the media literacy for young people will decline so quickly.
In the second half of the episode, we're discussing what Meta's decision means for news in Australia and how some sites are choosing to deal with it. Before that, though, it is time for the headlines with Eleanor Harrison-Dengate. It's Thursday, March 14.
Good morning, Sasha. So in some more tech news, in the US, a ban on TikTok is one step closer after the House of Representatives passed a bill that would force the app to cut ties with China. So if the Chinese-owned company doesn't, it would no longer be supported on app stores in America.
What we're after is not a ban, it's a forced separation, and the TikTok user experience can continue and improve so long as ByteDance doesn't own the company.
That's Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher from Wisconsin there. Lawmakers want ByteDance, which owns TikTok, to sell within 6 months, citing national security fears, which ByteDance has repeatedly denied is an issue. And the US has long been concerned about the ability for China to spy on users. TikTok says it has restructured the company to keep US data in the US, though. And the bill still has to get through the Senate. It's unclear whether it will have enough support, but if it does, Joe Biden will sign it into law, Sasha.
Australia is leaving the door open to following suit on this. Our Home Affairs Minister, Claire O'Neill, says she's watching what happens in America very closely. One expert thinks we should follow suit if the US ban goes ahead, saying, you know, the people who have informed this decision and have advised the government in America on the bill are at the top of their game and know what they're talking about. Now, for me personally, I would be really sad if this happened. I get it, national security, you know, if the experts say it's a risk, then okay, it's a risk. But I find TikTok a really interesting place to spend time. It's become kind of more than, it used to just be dances and silly things, and it's evolved past that, and it's a space for creators. There's all sorts of interesting ideas and art and people sharing their thoughts and ideas and plans on TikTok. I really enjoy it. And look, I'm not the only one who feels that way. The first Gen Zer elected to Congress is opposed to the ban in the US. He's Democratic Representative Maxwell Frost from Florida. Let's hear what he has to say.
I think that it is a violation of people's First Amendment right. TikTok is a place where people express ideas. I have many small businesses in my district and content creators in my district, and I think it's going to drastically impact them too.
I mean, it's interesting. I suppose I see this a bit as like the US trying to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have TikTok and all the benefits of TikTok, but they don't want that affiliation with China. Unsurprisingly, China is not happy about it. Their newspapers and media have been slamming this move. They're saying that, you know, this is going to come back to bite the US itself. And I think it's sort of interesting to note that, you know, the US Congress not too long ago, actually only I think in January, the Senate Judiciary Committee on Child Safety, they kept asking the Singaporean CEO of TikTok, Shou Chew, if he was Chinese and if he was affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party. And he kept saying, I'm from Singapore. Yeah. I'm from Singapore. So I'm a little bit like, okay, good for, you know, Congress if they really care about this. And I don't know, maybe it'll work for them. But also, they don't strike me as being the most informed on the subject, I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, no, look, I think you make an excellent point there. Look, before we move on to the next headline, there is also other news out of the US overnight. A judge in Georgia has thrown out 6 charges against Donald Trump and a few others in the case against him about trying to overturn the 2020 election result. The judge there saying it's due to a lack of detail in those charges, but the indictment does still stand. So the whole thing hasn't been thrown out, just a couple of those tiny key things that make up the whole indictment.
2/3 of women have reported bias or discrimination in Australian healthcare, according to a new national survey. So over 2,500 women were polled, and the report found gender bias was most often experienced while receiving care for sexual and reproductive health and chronic pain. And the report also found disrespectful and demeaning interactions often occurred when women were most vulnerable, like during intimate examinations and childbirth, Sasha.
The survey was conducted by the National Women's Health Advisory Council and is chaired by Assistant Minister for Health Jed Carney. The council was formed in late 2022 to address medical misogyny. Now, I found it interesting that the survey specifically looked to seek out responses from a really diverse group of women in Australia. So First Nations, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersex and queer women. Also a focus on culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, people in the regions and remote communities, as well as women living with disability. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, because for myself as a white straight woman, like, I can't say I've experienced this, but it obviously exists, and having these surveys uncover these problems is so important. Look, the report did also find gender bias in the lack of evidence around health issues more commonly experienced by women, so including gynecological issues like endometriosis, but also things like autoimmune conditions and chronic complex syndromes like chronic migraine. So the issue is obviously there, and this is looking to weed it out.
We're once again being told to prepare for a warmer than usual season, with the Weather Bureau predicting this autumn will be hotter than we've seen in the past. So most locations across the country are expected to exceed median maximum temperatures over the next few months. Winter is also likely to follow the same pattern. So warm autumns are becoming more common in Australia. We saw the second hottest March in 2019, the fourth hottest in 2022. We've also just gone through our third hottest February. So parts of Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania are just coming out of a severe heat wave, while sea temperatures off Sydney are warm enough right now to support a tropical cyclone, Sasha, sitting at 26 degrees. That's 3 above average.
Yes, and I live in Sydney, and I know only too well how humid and gross it's been. I personally am sick of this hot weather, but, you know, as the bomb keeps telling us every single 3-month outlook, it's going to be warmer than average. It's going to be warmer than average. So we're just being told to settle in and get used to it. Look, anyone waiting for some cooler conditions like me, the warm weather is going to stick around a little while yet before we start to see that more seasonal, cooler nights that we can expect in autumn. So hang on, it's coming. And billionaire Clive Palmer is determined to rebuild the Titanic, announcing plans for his second attempt. He thinks his Titanic II will set sail in 2027. Now, he did first announce he wanted to build a Titanic replica back in 2012. He then blamed pandemic delays for not getting it off the ground. I mean, how many years between 2012 and 28 years difference? I mean, I don't know, Clive. I don't know if I believe that. Look, once finished, Clive's Titanic will follow the original's planned journey from Southampton to New York. And he says it'll have all the same interior and cabin designs. That includes first, second and third class as its 20th century predecessor, but with vastly improved safety features. Here's hoping, Eleanor. I can't help but get bad vibes off a plan to try and recreate the most infamous ship sinking of all time.
I'm not going to be buying a ticket. I'm going to be honest. But having said that, I am obsessed with, like, there's this amazing YouTuber who does all these food videos, and he's like recreated all the first, second and third class menus, the crew menus on Titanic. They ate well. And also, if you ended up with a third class ticket, which I think, like, by inflation, it was only like, it's kind of reasonable. It was like $1,500 if you know, I mean, I might be getting this drastically wrong, so sorry. But a third class ticket was not too much. And also you could get like good food. It was like Irish stew and like it was very nice. I encourage anyone to look up the menus from the original Titanic. But I won't be going on Clive's.
No, me neither. Hey, Eleanor, thank you so much for being here for the headlines today. Next up, it's our deep dive with Cheek Media's Hannah Ferguson, talking all about the future of news and social media. Remember a couple of years ago when news was wiped from Facebook? It happened in 2021 and it was a big deal. People woke up one day without any of their usual news sources on their feeds. It was because Facebook had decided it didn't want to pay these companies for their content anymore, a policy that was brought in via the government's News Media Bargaining Code. A $70 million deal was eventually struck, which saw journalism reinstated on Meta's platforms. But that deal is about to expire, and Meta doesn't want to renew it. Instead, the social media giant wants news companies to pay them to push their content out on Facebook and Instagram. Labor has flagged it will look to force Meta to the negotiating table to avoid a repeat of 2021. But what if that doesn't work and we once again see news disappear from our social feeds? Hannah Ferguson, the woman behind Cheek Media, is already working towards that possibility after growing her audience through Instagram. She joins me now to discuss what it'll mean for her business and, more broadly, journalism in Australia. Hannah, welcome to the briefing. Tell us your reaction when you heard that Meta is planning to stop paying for news in Australia.
Honestly, I think we all saw this coming. If you work in news, if you work in media, and if you have a social media platform, I think you're understanding that what happened in 2021 could happen again. So I think we're all sort of prepared for this reaction from big tech and prepared for the decision that they've made. But nonetheless, it really destabilizes your whole company, your whole livelihood, the future prospects of your career in media as well.
Tell us, for the listeners who don't know, what is Cheek Media and how does it work?
So Cheek Media is an independent news commentary platform run solely by me alone, and it's basically was born on Instagram as a response really to the Morrison government and me wanting to be a political commentator online and sort of grow an online presence outside of the traditional journalism model. So it was started back in 2020 and then by 2021 had like 2,000 or 3,000 followers. So when this whole debate around news media on social media was occurring in 2021, quite irrelevant. Now I'm looking at about 104,000 followers that I could be losing. So it's a very feminist, progressive news commentary platform that reaches pretty much all Australians. So it's my livelihood, it's my career, and it's something I run solo, and I love it. It's the best job I've ever had.
How big has social media been in spreading Cheek Media and making it what it is today?
Cheek is only existing because of social media. It was born on Instagram. I think we tried at the time to make it a website and make it, TikTok is always a consistent sort of flow, but it's a different kind of algorithm and beast. I have a Substack. We've got a podcast. There's so many different sort of chains going at one time, but Instagram has consistently been the platform on which I have grown a following and an audience of people that are willing to pay for what I do. It's allowed me to write a book. It's kind of the past and the future of the company prospectively, and I really don't know what I'd do without Instagram.
Well, then this decision by Meta is obviously something then that probably, while you say wasn't surprising, is still probably a little bit concerning. How have you decided to deal with it?
I think for now it's really about trying to proactively and protectively get people off the platform. And that's not to say that I won't continue posting, although a lot of people took my changes as an indication that I might have been. But for now it's really about trying to send people to other avenues of content that keeps them connected with what I'm doing. So that's a Substack platform where they get a weekly opinion piece from me, just like a normal media company might have a weekly column. It's also, flowing people to that podcast network that I'm trying to build out as rapidly as possible now, because it really changes the way you approach the different income streams, the different models of, revenue and content. But the medium has been also that for podcasting, you're really trying to get people to your podcast through social media reels.
Yeah.
So you know that no matter where you look, even if you're trying to push people through different avenues, it all comes back to marketing on socials. So it's been incredibly difficult to kind of take those proactive steps really speedily in case your sort of central pillar dies.
Let's talk about the audience, which is predominantly youth and younger people, and that includes, older millennials as well, but it is definitely Instagram particularly is such an important tool in connecting with that group. We've seen the Daily Oz, which also grew its audience through Instagram, trying to make similar changes to what you are. Do you think they'll follow you? Do you think that audience, that younger group, is prepared to move off Instagram into other spaces?
Nowhere near the numbers that need to. I would say that of 104,000 followers, I might be able to get 10% before this change occurs successfully off platform. I think that the podcast is looking at like 25,000 listens a week, so that is a really good chunk of people. But we know that a lot of people don't like to learn or engage with information that way. So a newsletter in our email might reach some people, but not everyone wants to be filtered through information in those forums. So I think that as much as you can try to get at least half of your audience through a big push, I think that it would be an overestimation to say that many people will follow you there, if I'm being completely honest. Because I think that social media for so many years now has been such a dependent model of thinking and engaging and connecting with ideas. And I think that it's a joke that Meta thinks that it's not the place that people get their political and news content.
Yeah, well, it actually said it's a small part of the experience for its users and therefore it's not worth investing in. I'm guessing you don't agree with that.
Of course I don't agree. And I also think it's ridiculous for them to argue that it's sort of a decreasing part of the platform, because they also hide that part of the platform through their algorithmic functions. So they might say no one cares about news, but they're also suppressing certain words. And so certain posts that you make containing certain language is buried.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really clear manipulation that then actually feeds into their data. And I would like to see the back end and how that's influenced as well, because I disagree. My engagement rates are really, really high in a social media landscape that people would say is oversaturated with stuff like mine. So I think there is an argument totally against that, because I've grown 104,000 followers in 3 years. And I think that speaks to the need for young people to engage with the news through their phones.
And we've also seen that recently with TikTok, and we know The Briefing has its own TikTok, and we get so much engagement on particular news stories. And the same with Meta, we don't understand the algorithm. It changes a lot, but we know that younger people are getting their news from sites like TikTok, and we are talking about Facebook and Instagram, but it is this new space where people are consuming their news. We know that that's not new, and the fact that Meta wants to take that away is kind of questionable. Let's talk about 2021. That was when we saw Facebook wipe all news, and that included really important things like emergency services. 1-800-RESPECT was taken down as well. Now, we don't know what this new change could look like, but let's say news is gone from these platforms. What do you think Instagram and Facebook becomes without news?
I do think it just goes back to that sort of content influencer-driven model, which some people would argue I am, because I'm not ever claiming to be objective in the news I'm delivering. But a page like mine would prospectively be blocked because it looks and sounds like a media company, a news company, and it is. So in all likelihood, I'd be wiped. And instead, what we would be seeing is a rise in influencer-led kind of commentary and discussion of news and political issues, which is not really how we want young people engaging with media. I think it's really important that they do access ideas and opinions there, and that they are being filtered some information. But I think if it's purely led by people that don't have all of the information and qualifications to be talking about these issues, it's going to result in the kind of polarization we're already seeing in the lead up to major things like the US election this year. So I think it's really important that instead of having people just sort of kind of coming out and doing that inflammatory, polarizing, divisive content, which some people would also argue I engage in occasionally with opinion pieces like a lot of journalists do, we're not getting the facts and the information through the main media sources that should be posting on those platforms as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess that calls into question the future of journalism in Australia if we are not seeing these popular platforms used as a space for legitimate news organisations. Let's talk about what Meta's proposing, which is it wants the news organisations themselves to pay Meta for pushing its content. That's not really something that Cheek could engage in, is it? Because you just don't have the big backing of finance, do you?
No, and that's the thing. When these deals were created in 2021, the commercial deals with the large players in media in Australia, like obviously I was never part of that. So I've never depended on that money. I've used social media as a way to earn money through external partnerships, really, and for paid subscriptions, etc., with my followers. So I've never been able to depend on that revenue regardless, and I wouldn't be able to pay for that platform anyway. So I think that from my perspective, it never affected me in any sense. And obviously I understand why the bigger media organizations are so reliant on Meta, on Instagram and Facebook to create revenue, because they're providing space for them to advertise. Like, I understand why they're asking for this, but I also understand that from my perspective, it's a huge loss to me, because I would be completely wiped even though I wasn't making or spending money in the first place in that space. So I think it's a bit of a difficult question, because what you've got is a David and Goliath. You've got big tech who aren't willing to pay for news publishers publications to exist on that platform, but without it, Meta has the power, essentially, to kill Australian media, to kill independent media, and to kill off a media landscape that is highly problematic already, but ensures that only the richest players can survive.
Yeah. And I think that's such a worthy point. I think we get lost in the talk of big corp and, you know, the big players in this game, but there are groups like yours that need social media to survive effectively. Look, the government has said they will force Meta to negotiate. Is there an ideal scenario that you can picture we end up in once this deal expires and the government's kind of sat Meta down and gone, no, we're going to work this out?
It's really difficult because I would love to say that there's a future in Australia where we're not reliant on Instagram and the function of algorithms to digest news, because often we're ending up in silos and we're ending up in echo chambers that just reinforce our own views. I would love to see us get past that and be able to engage with hard news in a better way, but the current landscape means we are so reliant on social media to feed us anything. I understand the need for journalism to be paid fairly, but I also understand that without Meta's backing, we really lose regional news, independent news, and the survivors will be the remnants of News Corp. It's a real ticking time bomb. I don't know what a perfect outcome is, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in this space, but from my perspective as a solo person who's self-employed running a business that's just trying to have a go in this space, it could mean the end of me at a table I'm not even allowed to sit at.
Before we let you go, I want to talk kind of generally about engagement with news. I think that for young, I hate using the term young people, it's such an umbrella, but let's just say young people, quote unquote. I'm talking about people who maybe don't sit down to watch the 6 p.m. news on the TV, who aren't reading, you know, news sites online. They're spending time on social media and they are getting news through those platforms. How important is it in the grand scheme of things that we have young people engaged in news and engaged in different ideas?
It's vital. It's vital because I think that the Daily Oz is one of the best examples out there. The Daily Oz and then Cheek as more of an opinion-based source really are offering a spectrum of ideas to young people who have never felt welcomed in news and media before. The jargon, the lingo has been so far out of reach that we have felt excluded and unwelcome, and the views of young people haven't actually been taken seriously by many of the youth publications like Junkie and Pedestrian that have existed before us. And I think that our space operating in Instagram has actually tried to challenge that and say, no, young people have a voice. We are here to listen and to learn and to engage in different ways. And the future of media is actually reliant on these new ways of thinking that exist on social media solely a lot of the time. So I think that it cannot be overstated that the next generation of news is not going to be the way traditional media has done it. It's the way it currently exists on socials. And we are actually beating the bigger players in terms of engagement. I think that if Meta is to remove news and political content from Instagram and Facebook, the media literacy for young people will decline so quickly, and it's already at a low rate. So I think that we actually cannot overstate what this means for democracy at large as well, and the future of news and consumption of information.
Such an interesting chat. And Hannah, you are uniquely positioned to talk on this. Thank you for your time. Thanks for sharing your insights. Hopefully we see some sort of positive negotiations come between the government and Meta, but that is yet to be seen. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That is all for this morning's podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We will be back in your feeds at 3 o'clock with the afternoon briefing. And if you liked today's ep, make sure you are followed and subscribed to The Briefing wherever you listen so that you can stay up to date with everything we're putting out. You can also leave us a review, and why not share today's ep with a mate? I'm Sasha Barbagat. Thanks for listening.
Listener.